Welcome to the Conservative Caucus podcast. This is Jim Pfaff, president of the Conservative Caucus. I want to thank you for joining us today. Hey, I want to share with you this interview that I had with my friend, Dr. Ryan Reeves. He received his PhD from Cambridge University and was a professor at Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary for about a decade. He's now senior editor and digital strategy lead at Man in the Mirror. And he has a YouTube channel as well that you need to follow. If you just search Ryan Reeves, you'll find his YouTube channel. It's just past its 10-year anniversary. It has a lot of great information on church history that I think you actually find very useful. It's very applicable to things that are going on today. He also likes to build furniture, and he's a Tampa Bay Bucks fan. And I think you will really enjoy this. He lives in Florida, obviously. But Ryan's a great church historian. He's a theologian as well, taught theology. And we're discussing in this, trying to get a sense of what did the early Christian church do when it came to charity. We have a really kind of a free-flowing discussion here about this. We hit on a few other things too, but this is really important because we're in a time in the Trump administration where we're rapidly and thankfully rapidly beginning a phase of reducing the scope of government in our lives. I maintain that there's no reason at all for us to be doing massive charity out of the federal government. It's wasteful. Frankly, most of the money doesn't get to the people it's intended to help. We end up paying for that, and society is entirely capable of dealing with charity. And in fact, there's a monopoly on charity that happens through the federal government, which takes in trillions of dollars of our money and spends it on these efforts. All that money could be far more effectively spent in private sector efforts that want to deal with this. So it's going to be a good discussion, and you definitely want to be involved with it. Of course, go to our website, theconservativecaucus.com, and follow me on X at Jim Pfaff, also at TC Caucus. That's Conservative Caucus's home on X. Of course, we're on Instagram and Facebook and True Social and many social media platforms. But here's my discussion with Dr. Ryan Reeves. So welcome, everybody, to the Conservative Caucus podcast. I got my friend, Dr. Ryan Reeves. He's a Cambridge PhD. He focused in on the Tudor theological issues, in particular related to Henry VIII, and he may talk a little bit about that. But a lot of interesting background. Ryan, as I said before, is a professional theologian. Taught at Gordon-Conwell, doing a lot of work on his own now. And I think what we're trying to do here is we're going to talk about a few things. So we're going to hit on USAID funding and this debate that's happening with progressive Christians saying that it's a horror theologically for Christians to support Donald Trump wanting to cut USAID funding. There's a whole lot to that. And we're going to really hit on what are the implications, what should Christians think about, and what is appropriate in understanding the role of charity. But anyway, I'm so grateful, Ryan, for you coming on the podcast. We got to know one another in an odd way because you've got a massive YouTube channel. It is pretty massive, actually, compared to the average bear. Lots of good church history stuff that every Christian should look at. I think anyone interested in history should be looking at it. But so I contacted you some months ago, and because I appreciated what was on your channel, we've begun developing a friendship. But I'm so glad you were willing to come on the podcast today. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You know, I've been taking a lot of incoming recently because as a Christian dedicated to walking with Christ and dedicated to trying to implement Christian thinking in culture and in public policy. We're not a theocracy in this country, but we are informed by the Judeo-Christian ethic in a strong way, maybe nearly exclusively. This becomes a real issue when massive government cuts are coming in. And when it hits particularly things like USAID funding, where there is supposedly charitable work taking place, that suddenly brings up a moral and theological issue that Christians have to grapple with. Tell me, I know you keep up with the news and you know what's going on. What are your thoughts, just in general, before we dig into the details? What are your thoughts on that whole debate about cutting USAID funding? How does that hit you as a theologian, as a Christian, and as an American citizen?
Yeah, it's funny. It's been in my lifetime that there's been a shift in how Christians, at least on social media, conservative Christians have begun to view things. I mean, I was in seminary when it was impossible for churches to even get government money at all to help the poor. And it was just, we used to joke about it because I was in a seminary, I was training to go into academics, but I was 95% of the students were going into ministry or some kind of nonprofit work. And it was always a joke that the church would start something to help the poor out of their own funds. And then the government would set up one, in the same neighborhood and spend 3 times the money for half the benefit. And it was like, why don't you just give the money to the people that are doing the good? And I believe it was, I don't know policy history very well, but I believe it was in W when that changed. Suddenly I think the government was like, yeah, why are we spending so much money when there's already a successful relief policy there? And so that opened the Pandora's box to where everyone's like, okay, now churches are taking money from the government. What I would say, just coming from the education sector, is churches are finding out that taking money from the government is more complicated than it sounds. Education learned this in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, when suddenly it was, well, you take student loans, the government's now going to have a say in what kind of education, what kind of policies you're doing on campus. We're seeing this play out even right now.
Yeah. And
so churches and people looking at this, in my honest opinion, I'm finding there is just kind of this instant reactivity of how dare you cut anything that sounds like it's to the poor without processing, well, who's helping the poor? Is this an effective policy? And where's this money going? And is it even going to the places that we think it's going? And when you start asking those questions, which are, I think, normal questions in the government, you should be asking those questions all the time. The church is sitting there going, well, we still want the money. We still want the support so that we can continue to do what we're doing. And they're learning that, when you do things politically, you have a lot of the political ups and downs that happen. And so out of that kind of rat's nest, you have a lot of people going, this is the most morally repugnant thing. We're cutting money to the poor, the Bible, and then they just cherry pick verses about helping the poor. Or they secondly just go, well, we just got to keep doing what the government says, and then hopefully we can get the money back in a near future time. I've not heard enough folks saying, maybe we shouldn't be just seeing that the government is the only way to effectively take care of the poor. I haven't seen that conversation happen as much as I think it ought to happen. And historically, that tends to be where the question goes, is the call to take care of the poor is universal in the Bible.
Yeah.
No one gets away from that. The problem is that the Old Testament is a theocracy and the New Testament is a persecuted church under Rome.
Right.
And in no case does it have immediate applicable verses in a situation where you have a separation of church and state. And so you have a lot of complex moves you have to make before you say, okay, what is the church's and what is the individual Christian's responsibility? And so a lot of loud talking about things like USAID, but I don't know if it's necessarily starting in a place of saying, should we even be concerned about government being so involved in church poor relief anyway?
Yeah. And actually, in a sense, although not in precisely the same way as today, the early church, in the first few centuries of the church, it actually, in effect, was a separation of church and state. Like there was no government interaction at all with charity. And when you go, and you're an expert on church historian, that's why, just church history, why I'm saying this. But that's why when you go back to Justin Martyr and his apology, saying to Antoninus Pius in that work that, listen, look at all the charity we're doing. Look how we follow the law. Look, our marriages are good. And no, we don't worship the emperor, but we worship God, but we follow the edicts of what's taking place. They were out, he points to them saving babies that were thrown in the woods, an early form of an abortion, all these sorts of things. I mean, from that context, which is obviously dissimilar from our litigated and put into place separation of church activity from state activity. Draw some parallels there for me. Give some historical context there. What was the church doing at that time, and how was the government interacting with that, as best you know?
Yeah. This is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. It's only in the modern world where we can conceive of helping our neighbor as helping someone that lives thousands of miles away from us. In the ancient church, it's your neighbor is the person next door to you that you see is in poor relief, in dire straits, I should say. And I would often say this with students. I was like, stop calling your neighbor somebody you never met. It's the actual person down the road that's hard to love, that's in a hard situation. The homeless guy you're passing that needs help. It's the actual neighbors. And what you're right about the effective separation of church and state, periodic persecutions and these things. And yeah, throughout the church, what we call the church fathers, those first 3 to 5 centuries of the church, there's a repeated, they point out all kinds of things. Like you said, our marriages are doing better. They're healthier. We're raising our kids to be good citizens. Fear God, honor the king, as Peter says. Those phrases were constantly there. And when persecution came, they didn't riot or cause rebellion. And they carry that through. And the biggest one that they often cite is specifically how they help the poor, the widow, and the orphan. It's just everywhere. And the way they lived that out, though, was not simply, as one might do today, just like you give money online to a charitable organization, all of which is a good thing. We don't want to say anything bad about that.
Absolutely.
But what they would do is they would love and bring into their orbit people that were in need through care. So I drove by one today downtown, in a sense, a mission. They created missions in their cities, though they wouldn't be called that back then, where it wouldn't just be, hey, here's a buck for a meal. It was more, hey, you need help, come with me and let's put clothes on you. Let's give you a place to sleep. It was far more holistic. It was far more actual inner life together. And
accidental in a way, so to speak, just accidental connections with folks. And
let me play that out for you the way church that I know that figured this out. This church was concerned about taking care of the needy and the poor. And they got sick of writing checks and just not quite knowing where it went, and not, you get a postcard or letters or things. And so finally somebody just raised their hand with the elders and said, why don't we just do a look around like 5 to 10 miles around our church and see our demographics? And he found that there was a significant number of folks that were first generation Hispanic that had moved there. And then somebody just goes, why don't we offer free ESL courses? And then while they're here, like we can give them something they feel they need, and they're coming to take advantage of that. We'll cover all the costs. We could even have meals. The more we get to know them, the more we can love them, the better.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, that was effective. Because what they did is they found their people around them and they loved them. That is far more what the early church was doing, is who's actually here versus just some sort of missile shot where you're like, well, I helped someone by sending a few dollars here, a few dollars there. Again, not that that's ever bad. That's actually a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But what you see is a more, who is actually in my orbit? Who's my city? Who's my community? And then from there, the church gets active and involved.
And getting right back to the early church as well, really correct me if I'm wrong. You know the history better than I do, but clearly it seems as I read scripture that what the church was doing is their core charitable mission was really within the church and helping people who were coming into the church, oftentimes poor. I'm going to do a companion thing with this with my friend, Dr. Colin Elliott, coming up. But he always talks about the fact, and in fact, he wrote this in his book on the Antonine Plague that called Pax Romana. He was talking about the fact that most of the people in the cities around the Roman Empire, most of the people were in makeshift living and dwellings connected somewhere near the city rather than, we think about all the buildings in Rome, and they were all magnificent and wonderful, but that was a small portion of the city that were connected to those. It was people literally sometimes living in caves, much less making makeshift things. And then those people would come into the church community and be taken care of. Am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, you are. To use a modern practical theology term, we often talk about an evangelism funnel, that there are those that, that they come for Easter and Christmas and you barely get to connect with them. And then the further down the funnel you go, you get smaller, but you get more contact. And of course, when you get through it, you're a believer, you've been baptized, you're now being discipled. In a sense, the church's giving was inverse to that. The way they loved it was the more people were coming towards the church, the more they were being drawn in and allowing themselves to be taken care of. Because, not everybody wants to be taken care of. There's plenty of folks that you say, hey, come, we'll feed you, we'll take care of you, come to church. They'll be like, heck no, I don't want anything to do with you. What are you going to do? You can't help that. But the church was always like, the more you allow yourselves to hear the gospel and to come into the church, the more we'll take care of you. And then within the church, they don't stop being poor or needy. They just now become disciples who you're taking care of. And how much more do you take care of your brothers and sisters? So it wasn't ever spelled out that way, but you see it in practice.
Well, and it seems to me in the book of Acts, that's actually almost precisely the description. Yeah. So when you're thinking about the need for deacons that showed up early in the book of Acts, the most notable one being Stephen, really what they were doing was taking care of the food service to people in precisely this condition that were part of the body of Christ. I mean, you had early on, it's probably more than this, you had 8,000 people just in the first two major preachings of Peter early in Acts coming to Christ. Yeah. So you got 8,000 people here, many of whom didn't have means, some of whom did, and now you're trying to manage that. Am I right about saying it that way?
Yeah, that wasn't church growth. That was church swelling. That was like instant swelling. And, from just a logistical standpoint, you're like, that must have been wild to go through. And you're right. And what's interesting about that story, too, is they bring their baggage in. So if you read that story, it's not that certain folks, it wasn't a distribution problem, is that the Jews were not giving enough food to the Greeks because they were pagans and they had been so anti each other for so long. And now under Christ, they were being brought in.
And the Hellenistic Jews as well, too.
Yeah, Hellenistic Jews,
which was a point of contention as well.
Compromisers, those are the liberals that don't believe anything. Yeah, they've given up their Hebrew, all this stuff, and and you have that kind of those dynamics and complexities right there on the page. But you're right. The answer was solve this, stop it. We're not going to treat each other this way, and we're going to keep it all fair. And you get to James, where you this keeps happening, where like the poor are asked to sit at the feet of the wealthy, and I always used to tell students, somebody in a meeting was just like, hey, we're the ones that are really sacrificing a lot financially. Our feet are tired. We just want to sit. It's okay. Like we're not really saying they're lesser than us. And James it wants nothing to do with it. He's like, yes, you are saying you're better than them. Stop. And so there is an egalitarian of spirit within the community of the body where it's like, whatever we can do, time, talent, treasure, we often say, we're going to give that to each other as often as we can, whenever we can, and have capacity. I always say the Bible isn't kidding where it says if you act like that, you not only have the joy of the Lord, but you have community, you have strong connection, and people see it, and it becomes infectious, which is why the early church continued to swell, is they were saying this is where groups of people that ethnically, linguistically, probably sociopolitically, and economically have no business being together. But under Christ, they're all like, yeah, we're all brothers and sisters. We're going to take care of each other. And it becomes infectious at that point.
So prior to the Middle Ages, do you know of any example in the church where and I'm saying prior to Charlemagne and what led up to Charlemagne, do you see any example in the early church of cooperating in any fashion with government to try to take care of poor relief?
No, because there was still a standard status of persecution in certain areas. The areas where it was the most calm and there wasn't lots of persecution, places like North Africa and other places, no, you really don't. Often the government was just leave them alone. We don't have nothing to do with you. So the idea of cooperation was just a square peg in a round hole. It was often seen as the Christian's badge of and not to dovetail it too much, but what I was saying before churches could receive government money, when I was in seminary, people were off. It was a badge of honor to have a successful funded poor relief. Like, our church buys into this. The people of means see this. They see how we're doing all this, and that was considered to be good. And I hate to say it, but I've seen many of those evaporate because the churches just say, "Well, we pay our taxes, the money's gone."
Yeah,
and I think that becomes, at least in terms of how Christians see themselves today, I don't think the Bible gives you says, "Well, you paid your taxes, well, you've done your part." There are still people in your church, in your community, that have needs. There are people in your neighborhoods that have needs. And if that's part of your mission, go do it. But just simply saying, well, all we have to do is do this through government, that tends to narrow the point of giving and poor relief down to just simply giving means and money and food to folks in need, which is a good thing. But the point was always, we do this because of who we are. And by doing this, we want people to be drawn towards Christ. The whole point is to draw. You can feed for a day, but you need to feed the soul.
So what I want to get into some early church fathers' theological thinking, but one more point of direct scriptural teaching that we look at, because I would maintain, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, but I would maintain that government charity is a monopoly over private charity. And you get those kinds of inefficiencies. I think it's amazing since the Bush administration and faith-based initiatives,
right?
Which was there are some progressive Christians out there right now who are just all up in arms over the pull of USAID funding, who are saying, but Christians totally supported George W. Bush bringing in faith-based initiatives. Au contraire, I've been working in public policy for 30 years, and I was screaming about it.
Yeah, it was controversial even in the seminary world, because immediately it was just like, what does this mean? Like, does this mean that we have, like, what if they come in and say, you can't teach that, preach that?
Right, exactly. So let's take what you were talking about, though, with this natural charity that was happening certainly because Jesus commanded it and the Old Testament exampled it. And by the way, for those out there, Christians, I mean, I think Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but Ryan and I both believe the Old Testament is as applicable as the New Testament today. There is a strain of thinking out there, almost Marcionite in its heresy.
It's called heresy. Yeah, it's called heresy.
That says the Old Testament doesn't apply. It absolutely does apply. But when they were all motivated,
Jesus himself says it's not going away.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's amazing how this and Pelagianism and so many other things we could talk about, just they never go away. They get called out, but they never go away, it seems. But anyway, they were all motivated by scriptural teaching on all this and acting upon it. But now I want to get to practical, eschatological, almost thinking on this. The sheep and the goats. Jesus points out that those who are the goats who are getting cast out did not help the orphan and the widow and the poor, whereas one amongst many characteristics of those who are gathered in as sheep is that they did take care of those things. Yeah. As you're thinking through this debate that's taking place right now, from a theological perspective, how does this sheep and goats thing apply when people like me as a Christian are advocating strongly that we need to get rid of all government charity, in my opinion? First of all, there's no constitutional authority. So just from a law perspective, there's no authority for any of the charitable stuff that we do through the federal government. We're just politically dealing with the fact that we gave into it. But that's a different matter. Theology obviously rises above law and constitutions. What is God's perspective, as best you can tell theologically, as it relates to charity and government? Are we violating the law and violating even, or potentially getting cast out as goats if we're talking about taking away public money?
Well, I'm really glad you framed it that way, because, I would want to start, this is the professor in me. Whenever you get a controversy, all right, let's take one step back, set the stage, and then play the chessboard. And what I do want to step back, and that verse you mentioned is great. And we could spend 2 hours or longer going down all the number of verses where the way you treat the poor, the widow, and the orphan matters.
Yeah.
Kings in the Old Testament are repeated. Go read Psalm 82, which is ironically a little bit of my dissertation. It's a major point. Is Psalm 82, it goes down this thing and it says, you kings of men. And it goes down and it says, here's the things you've done that are going to deserve your death. And the number one it talks about is the oppression of the poor, the suppression of those in need. You're just basically not doing at all what you're supposed to do to the least amongst you. And there's a famous line that says, I have declared that you are gods. I'll explain that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But you shall die like men. And the gods there, calling the emperors or the kings gods, was a reference back to Exodus, where the power of God's care and provision for this world as Elohim, that word Elohim is transferred to the judges and then later the kings of Israel.
And Elohim is the word he was using for gods there. So
they are Elohim,
which is also used as a name for God as well. So yeah,
exactly. Elohim is the generic name for God in the Old Testament. That's right. And so to use it in modern political language, it's a bit of divine right kingship, but with challenges, because the Old Testament judges and kings were said to be Elohim, like little gods, meaning they stand in God's place. They represent what his hands are supposed to be doing in this earth. So all throughout the Bible, this is what my main point, all throughout the Bible, it's like, how are you treating the poor, the widow, and the orphan? Repeatedly. And Jesus talks about, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than a rich man to go into heaven. Like, it warns us repeatedly. So I always start in the step back. Everyone, put it the other way, no one is exempt from these commands if you call yourself a Christian. How you care for the poor, the widow, and the orphan matters. And it doesn't mean that every single person needs to give 100% of their finances to care for it, but we need to care about it. We need to give according to our capacity, and we need to be holding our churches and ministries accountable to talk about this stuff. The problem, though, and this is when you get into the actual fight, is how are we supposed to take care of the poor? And the problem, as I've already said before, is the Old Testament is a theocracy. So when you see verses like Psalm 92 saying, you're going to die because you've oppressed the poor and you're not taking care of the poor, that is for the kingdom of Israel. You come to the New Testament and the kingdom is where? It's within his church. It's lived out to the church. And that becomes where, and Protestantism historically, by the way, has been very divided on this question. So the fact that we're having this debate now is not new. It's been there from the beginning. So I don't want to make it sound like we're all just, this is all smoke and mirrors.
Right.
We have argued over this repeatedly. Are we the same as government, Henry VIII? Praying for the redcoats later in English history when they're coming over? Or are we more in favor of freedom and separation and not being a part of church structures? In America, of course, the most extreme version of that would be the Amish, the Pennsylvania Dutch, folks that want nothing to do with government or society. So we have these double extremes going on.
Mm-hmm.
And since the 1750s, Christianity has tried to find this place in the middle. Protestants, I should say, is trying to find this place in the middle where they're going, yes, but we're constantly going, yeah, that's a good thing, but it's not the church. And so our taxes funding a policy that might do amazingly wonderful things, I don't think is the same as the church's call to take care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan in their midst, to look out for those, right around them in their immediate vicinity, the people that they come in contact with. If you're an employer, how you take care of your employees matters. Are you cutting as much of their earning potential as possible to make yourself richer? Well, that might need to be challenged according to your ethics. Things like this. We need to think more organically about it, but instead, what I've seen in the past, year or so, longer, frankly, since the faith-based initiative started, is this too simplistic an idea that helping the poor in any capacity therefore makes me feel as if I'm doing my part according to the commands of Scripture. And, this is the hottest take I'll give you. Posting angry things on social media because USAID is gone is not the same thing as actually taking care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan.
One aspect of it that is never talked about, because they're always trying to turn it on the conservative, person that supports Donald Trump, saying you want to do just the opposite and take it away. Yeah.
And USAID being, I'm very inexperienced in policy, so I won't try to give you my opinion. I can give you my complete common sense thought on some of these things as we go. But I'm not a policy history guy, which is why I'm glad to have this conversation with you. But for me, I'm looking at very well thought out Christians, pastors, theologians. These are the people on my social media. And I'm watching them say, here's a policy that just changed where we cut something from the budget. Here's a verse that I think completely destroys why that should never have happened. And again, the move is like, that's to Israel. That's to Old Testament Israel. Like that's a theocracy. You can't just go, this policy gets trumped by a verse that's dealing with the theocratic kingdom of Israel.
Yeah.
Unless you want a theocracy, and then we have a different conversation on our hands.
That's right. Well, and in a sense, in the Old Testament, I mean, I guess you could technically say theocracy, but actually, I'm not sure. I've always felt that that's not maybe the best political science term to put on that, because when I look at the book of Judges, what I see God having instituted is the same that he instituted that began with Moses, and particularly Jethro helping his father-in-law, helping him figure out how to practically administer it. But that, the theocracy was, you are responsible directly yourself to follow God. Yeah. And Moses will set up law courts to judge disputes. Yeah. Like it was about the closest thing to the libertarian ideal of limited government than I can imagine. I mean, when you read not only the Pentateuch, but you go into Joshua and into Judges. You had in Judges a couple instances where someone came up like a king, but it's not a king at all that God wanted. He wanted people to walk with him directly in Israel, in ancient Israel, and then adjudicate their disputes according to his law, right, when they came up, and nothing more. I mean, technically, some people will call that a theocracy, but when we think of a theocracy, we think of a king who takes in a divine right of kings sort of approach. Am I missing something here in terms of that?
Yeah, I was speaking euphemistically for sure.
Surely, I know.
If I were, your point is exactly right, especially since the 20th century, theocracy is a loaded term.
Right.
And so, when people hear the word theocracy today, they think either The Handmaid's Tale or, modern day Iran or something. And I think at least for English audiences, modern English audiences, we should be like, hey, we should, I think you're right. We should probably drop theocratic. But you're right. It does look more divine right. It is absolutely divine right, where with checks and balances, your point is accurate, which is the prophets, the priests, and the judges were to work in harmony with the king. It would have been largely inconceivable that the king would have been considered, God on earth or anything weird. I'm sure they wanted to, but
Yeah, well, and it was easy for people even in Israel to potentially take that upon themselves when it was typically a prophet, and certainly in the case of David and Samuel, a prophet that anointed them king under God's authority, and they could abuse that authority. David didn't. Saul did. Yeah. But the other thing is this: when you think of those kings, back to your point in Psalm 82, and the poor, you mentioned how I'll just read here: vindicate the weak and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and destitute, rescue the weak and needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked.
Which is protection language as well. That's
well, and it's actually judicial language, is it not? Like this isn't whether you're feeding them, and certainly we have plenty of scripture in Old Testament talking about caring for the poor in that manner, in a physical manner. But this is about not giving people who aren't in those categories preference in the law. Over the others. Is that really the substance of that verse right there?
If we were to unpack it, it's corruption, root and branch, 100%.
Yeah,
some kind of rot has happened, and as much as the Old Testament gets a bad rap, God really does not smite people a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
He is the most long suffering in the Old Testament. I mean, just to compare. You mentioned Acts. I mean, Ananias and Sapphira. They screwed up once and it was like kapow. In the Old Testament, they're going generations of just being like, let's just throw all the other deities and have temple prostitutes, and they're going all kinds of nuts. I mean, let's just put it this way: if I were to go through a play-by-play of the kinds of things happening, we would be TVMA pretty quick.
Yeah, that's right.
It's nasty stuff.
That famous Tim Hawkins song on Samson and Delilah, and he pauses after a really crude thing. He says, "This is a Bible story."
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely TVMA.
And so, but all that stuff's happening, and God is for generations saying, "Come back, come back, come back," and He's like, "You're going to get more punishment the longer you act like this." He's almost like a parent talking to a screaming toddler. He's like, "Stop, stop! No, we're not going to come back. Like this is no, don't eat the dirt. That's gonna make you sick." Kind of reality. And Israel's like, "No, we're just going to do whatever we want." And so God is not super. So when God in Psalm 92 goes, "You're going to die like men. It's over." That's a rare like the corruption is so deep, root and branch, that He's going to eviscerate it from the top and start over with the new king.
Yeah, and which, by the way, reminds me of the other story in the New Testament where a group of people came up to Jesus and said, "What about Pilate having mixed the blood of the sacrifices with the people he had killed in the temple?" Yeah. And seeking justice for this, right? And what was Jesus' response? "Unless you repent, you will all likewise perish." And then another group that came up and said, I think it was a big grain silo or something fell down, killed a bunch of people. And they asked about that. And those probably were two stories that came up at different times and were just kind of cobbled together because a lot of people don't better. But, the New Testament Gospels aren't necessarily perfect chronological order everywhere. Sometimes there are areas of compilations of teachings that Jesus was giving. But,
there's one more verse to add to that pile, which is Matthew 26. Jesus does say, "The poor we will always have." Yeah. There will always be poor. He doesn't see it as a solvable problem because people will always make self-destructive decisions or have limitations or be just stuck in a cycle or just born into it, and they need help out of it. And so long story short, he doesn't see it as, let's just put it this way, solving the world's problems is not the goal.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Like losing our minds over every, the funny you mentioned this tower falling and killing folks. We were in exegesis class like within months after 9/11 when we were going through that verse. And that was, you could hear a pin drop where the professor's just like, Jesus is saying, don't crowdsource tragedies to read the tea leaves to see you understand if God's upset with you, or these things just happen in a fallen world, as we often say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's death all around us. Like the calamity. I heard, the calamity of this earth is overwhelming. I mean, you just can't fix it. And that's one of the big arguments I'm having with some of these progressive leaders privately and otherwise. They're like, well, yeah, but millions of children are going to die in Africa if we cut off USAID funding, which, by the way, is a lie. I mean, there might, and I doubt there'll be any direct deaths. And if there are, related to the governments involved that make it impossible for these people to live a life. But you go back and consider these things, you cannot ever have enough money or effort to fix all of these problems, right? Whether it's the AIDS crisis or whether it's, poverty and starvation, you cannot fix it all. And that really, I think, in my mind, tell me from a theological perspective, but in my mind, that emphasizes the fact of what you were talking about earlier, that it's really a geographical proximity approach to charity that is, one, the only practical way to do it, because the government doesn't bring anyone to Christ or make their lives better, bring them into moral certitude, anything. There's nothing like that. And in fact, that poor relief probably is connected, certainly in the New Testament, to discipleship in many ways, or drawing people into following Christ. So it's a fool's errand to think that you're going to consign charity to a government and get any good effect out of it. It's also an error, in my opinion, to say that if you call for the government to stop doing that, that there's some sinful aspect of that demand.
Right. And there's all these policy questions because just as a lay person, a hobbyist when it comes to contemporary policy, I'm going, there's two ways to cure the poor or to help. One is to relieve the immediate situation. The other is to enrich the country so that, the tide floats all ships up. Wages go up. There's more prosperity. Home prices go down, or at least steady out. Interest rates go down. All those things. And suddenly the American dream starts to happen at all levels of society. And when you start talking about what the government's role is, and we've had, again, 500 years of this as Protestants, I think one of my challenges right now is I don't think people are sitting there going, is the government doing anything that the Bible commands us to do, or is it simply living out its own, policy needs? And I think the answer is, I'll just call it a spade. I think what a lot of nonprofit folks are worried about is that we've spent probably a generation not teaching people to take care of the poor out of their own pockets from their churches in their communities. We've just gone, well, the government's doing it now. And I think that might be where some of that anxiety from folks is coming from. I'd be interested in having those conversations where they're going, we know right now that this is not, it would be like having a church where you haven't talked about tithing ever. And then suddenly you're coming into budget season and you're going like, we haven't even taught them what their responsibility towards the church is. And I feel the same way with poor relief in churches where we're going, well, we pay our taxes. And now that those policies are changing, what do we have left? And I think the answer is the church has to get back to being a church.
Yeah.
And looking at itself not as an extension of any type of government. Well,
and I think that as we reduce these government efforts at so-called charity, which, in the George W. Bush administration expanded the reliance on this charity in the churches. And then in the Obama administration, put this into a secular, almost anti-religious efforts through the expansion of USAID funds and other things.
Let me add one more wrinkle in there too.
Yeah.
I've made the appeal that no Christian should get out of no church should get away from the question of how are we taking care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan, and looking out for justice. Everyone should be concerned about that.
Absolutely.
I'll add one more piece to that, which is Christians should also have rigorous checks on where their money is being spent. And I'll tell you, because I've done it, if you go to a wealthy businessman or woman and you're raising money for a ministry or a vision or anything like this, they are absolutely going to ask you where that money is going, and they're going to want to see reports and receipts, and they're going to fire you and not give you any more money if you play around with their money. They're usually very happy if your mission's on point and your accounting's on point to get behind you. But you mess around with their money, they're gone. The problem with it funneling through policies and governments is good luck with accountability. And I think that is part of what is the challenge is folks are going, well, we see lots of spending and not a lot of good. And maybe what needs to be focused on is that accountability in our giving, which honestly, frankly, wealthy Christians always hold people accountable to when it's one-on-one. So,
yeah. Well, and everyone who gives to a nonprofit organization should go to charitynavigator.com and take a look at how they rate things, and they'll rate them lower if there are high administrative costs. Now, that doesn't always mean it's a bad nonprofit, because sometimes what they do requires a heavy amount of administration, but not commonly. You go to and look at Salvation Army, or you look at Tunnel to Towers, or you look at Samaritan's Purse, and you find the administration costs are below 10% in every one of those instances. And in fact, in Salvation Army's case, it's more severe because every person that works with Salvation Army raises their own support. Yeah. And so it's really important to understand those things. And I do believe that Christians are going to have to get very serious if they support Donald Trump in these efforts, as I do. They are going to have to get serious at looking at where are alternatives. Yeah. But that, whenever we can get taxes down enough that we keep enough of our own money, which is another factor in this, the government steals our money, and there is a meme out there, all taxation is theft, right? But that's actually true. It's your money. The question is, do you authorize the theft? And we're authorizing it at outrageous levels right now.
The taxation system is built on this idea of the common good. And in various times and ways, the wealthy were just benefactors. They built buildings of amazing grandeur, and they funded public works and all that type of stuff. People don't do that today. You wish they would, but they don't. And so some form of taxation is always included. Yeah. And it's reasonable. You're right. It's a reasonable theft. That's probably the right way to say
it. Well, it's an authorized theft. It's still theft. Yeah, it's kind of like what's the definition? I heard R.C. Sproul one time talking about the definition of government is force.
Yeah.
It's legal force. When you try to work.
That's true in all political theology from Protestants for 500 years. It is the definition of a will to power, a force that's given to folks. And the whole, one of my guilty pleasures is I do sometimes watch sovereign citizen videos on YouTube, and the idea that no one can compel or force you is like if Protestant theology would be like, yes, they can. That is Romans 13. His job, the role of the government is to compel you in certain cases. Yes,
right.
Yeah, as much as we don't like it.
That's right. But it also requires us to. When we have authority in the process, as the early church did not in Rome, that we should demand that be done in a righteous manner. So even though I grapple with the term Christian nationalism, kind of bothers me because I think it's easily misunderstood. Nonetheless, if there is a thing of Christian nationalism, it is our society needs to become good again. We need an expansion of the gospel and of people following after Christ as disciples. We need to expand that effort. And then from that learning to demand of our government righteousness, which it is an entirely unrighteous government right now in every way.
Well, and everyone's flipping out about Christian nationalism. And I don't adhere to that. I'm not scared of it. It doesn't bother me. But this theonomic turn has always been attractive to Protestants in America. There's always been this, particularly when things feel like they're decaying or they're just not working and like it's just kind of clogged up in government. There's this sense of like the unbelievers who are running this thing are running it into the ground. If we're just faithful with who we are, we'll eventually vote them all out. I've heard that for 30 years. So the new version of it is just a new name. But at the end of the day, you understand why they're saying that. Even if you disagree with it, what they're saying is basically, like the early church, the more faithful you live, the more that it's like investing. The more you invest diligently and like consistently, the more it compounds. It's the same thing with our being salt and light in this world. The more you focus on those things and do what you're supposed to do, and not just meme and troll each other on social media because your policies either supported or not supported. As much as those are fun, I love doing that too. But that doesn't get the job done. That doesn't get the job done. What we need to do is, I think the churches need to get more into this question of accountability. I have been pretty surprised at thoughtful Christians being unwilling during the Doge stuff to be like, we need hyper accountability in government. Like whether or not it's hitting with a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel is debatable. But like, since when did we become anti-accountability? Like, show me the numbers. Where's this money going? Like kind of thing. If we're so invested in when the government's policies, where is it going? And I think I almost see what's happening right now as an opportunity because, again, we need to start talking to churches about how are you going to answer this? Because you can't just stay mad about everything. You have to start doing what the church is supposed to do again, which is to take care of the widow and the orphan in your midst.
Yeah. And by the way, you mentioned how a lot of people had thought about our taxes being for the public good. And really interestingly, at least in the American experiment under our Constitution, taxes are not for the public good. They're for the maintenance of government under specified authority. A lot of people don't understand that the Constitution is a charter of negative rights, not a positive rights. In law, the concept of a positive right is, I have a right and you cannot take it away from me. And that's what the Bill of Rights does for us and, individuals and for states, according to the Ninth Amendment in particular, where it lays that out. But the Constitution says government may only do these things and no more. And you are restrained thereto. Plus, you're subject to elections every 2 years, every 4 years for presidents. And so this concept needs to be understood as well. So we have a real lot of work to do for Christians in particular, but Americans in general, to understand that this is a system of limited government. And the only role, and this is my transition to our second topic, our only role in government is to make sure that there's a fair playing field, that government stays away from economy and religious sentiment and public speech and all these other things, so that the American people can provide, the benefits of society, because the government is incapable of providing benefits to society. And
as I always say it's messy in both directions. Like nobody gets a clean, perfect, Pollyannish life. But it gets messier if you just have the government kind of run everything for you.
It does. Well, because it can't efficiently do so. Evidenced by, we're recording this on the day after Donald Trump had a brilliant effort of showing Jerome Powell's inefficiency of trying to renovate a building at the tune of $3.2 billion.
I caught the headline. Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic. And we'll have a phone discussion on this or maybe bring it up sometime. But that was a brilliant way of showing how government gets way out of hand in areas where it doesn't have authority. But we do need to inform the Judeo-Christian ethic as Christians into society, and we need to do it aggressively and within our rights as citizens. So government's role, and I want to shift now, because you've been doing recently from a theological perspective and also from a practical perspective, you've been spending some time working in the area of AI and in a very cool fashion. I mean, we're on potentially the precipice of an amazing renaissance in American economy, because AI is already making a massive difference in what happens in our economy. So yesterday, and I shared this with you, The Economist had a headline where they said on X, where they said model builders claim AI will be better than the average human at all cognitive tasks in a few years. The consequences could be as great as anything in the history of the world economy. Now, I was listening to that and I'm thinking, AI better than the average human at all cognitive tasks. And my philosophical hats suddenly popped on because, and I'm just going to read what I said here, and then I'll let you feed off of it. I want to get your opinion on this. I said, AI will be an amazing and highly useful tool that can positively enhance our productivity. So far, Grok is winning that race, but in no way will it ever surpass the cognitive capabilities of mankind. Sorry, you dropped there, but thanks for coming back on. It will do better than a lot of humans who won't use their cognitive skills, but it cannot surpass it because, one, it uses silicon-based chip systems. Humans are carbon-based. Two, though processing capability is extremely high for AI, it mimics cognitive skill. It doesn't possess it. There are many reasons for that, but one is, three, humans design the systems. AI doesn't design itself. That won't change because, four, whatever method AI systems may undertake in the future to design new AI systems will still be based on the original human construction. And five, AI will always lack unique human characteristics like empathy, moral judgment, conscience, the ability to understand epistemological certitude, which epistemology is the study of how we know what we know. AI doesn't have all this, but it is going to be really, really important. What, as a theologian and a guy who's been studying AI as well, what do you think are the moral and theological implications of the emergence of AI in this country?
Yeah, I think it's the weirdest time in history, and I say that as a professional historian, where my parents are still alive. They wrote on typewriters, and now my middle son, he's a Tolkien lover and loves fantasy and stuff. He has created his own GPT where he has done a bunch of writing and drawing and stuff, and he's creating his own world in his mind. But he's offloading it into AI to have conversations with AI in a way that can help brainstorm him about, because, well, I want to write a story about a king with a son who rebels. And he's like, can you help me like think of a plot structure? And I'm just going, I wish I had this when I was a kid.
Yeah, really.
It's like this is amazing. And it's only going to get weirder. And I'm saying that to the people that are not super tech savvy. It's going to feel weirder. I texted you yesterday. I just had my first experience going through a drive-through, and I didn't talk to a human, or other than the person who handed me the bag, no human contact the entire time. It's going to feel at least weird for a little while. But I think people are getting more comfortable to it. The way to think about it theologically is a tool has no moral center within it. It's the tool user always. So just generative AI stuff, which if you look into it is really just an extension of computer science going back to the beginning, when back in the 40s when they were doing the Turing stuff and cracking the codes for German stuff. I mean, all this stuff, the way math and statistics and all this stuff comes together, it was relatively predictable, as though we didn't expect it to happen all this fast. But just like Microsoft Word is a tool that can be used to write the Bible, but also write Mein Kampf. Yeah. Just like, a hammer can be used to build, it can be used to destroy. AI is going to occupy that super powered, like Lambo powered, high capacity thing. That's going to, it itself is not going to make us act immorally. It's going to reveal our immorality. Yeah, I was going to say, and it's going to also give us our opportunities for the good parts of who we are to flourish. I may have my phone here, right? Today I had to go do some errands for my daughter. She has a gym membership and it wasn't paying. And I went in and I said, I need to fix my daughter's account. And he goes, what's your daughter's phone number? This is my only daughter. And I go, I don't know. Hold on. Let me look it up. And we've already begun outsourcing things that we used to keep up here into other devices. And in a sense, AI is a similar tool. It's super high powered. But if you're already an immoral person that's going to like skirt by and like cheat, like what was it, that immediate story of a lawyer who submitted a brief to a judge that had like hallucinated case studies? I mean, something tells me that wasn't his first time cutting corners. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like it reveals the tool reveals the tool user in every case. Mm-hmm. So AI is going to reveal a lot of like shady behavior and bad faith actors using it for things like defrauding people and stealing their money and pretending to be Keanu Reeves when they call. I don't know if you saw that story, but we're going to get all that stuff. But we also got it. You and I are old enough to remember. We got it when the internet was first invented. That's right. And we had this amazing super highway of information, and then we had chat rooms where every gross thing under the world was said and done. This is Jesus said this. It's not what goes into us or what tools we use. It's what comes out of us.
I was just reading that this morning. But it is so true. Absolutely. What we end up doing is we want to set and this happens with government as well, and politics. We set this, and wokeism actually really hits a lot of this. Wokeism is the Pharisees coming up to Jesus and saying in that story you talked about, why are your disciples not washing their hands before they eat? Because they had built this structure, the structural demand that never brought anything out of the heart good. And then, as you just mentioned, Jesus turned that around and said, no, it's what comes out of a man that defiles him, not what goes in. And this is a big issue with AI. And in fact, to that point, when one of the reasons I tell my folks and myself and others not to use AI as your final research tool is because these large language models are built on not only a recency of internet data within the last 40 years that is modern, but it is also it's from just a human construct. So that's always got its negatives, but it is a more woke or woking concept, almost radical leftist concept with certain political implications. And it's not that the AI is necessarily doing bad in what it spits out. It's only got a specific bit of data to work with. This is where Grok is going to be interesting, because Elon Musk's team at XAI is changing that a little bit. They start with a large language model, but now they're going to have AI build its own truth-bearing as they claim it will be, models
that's
within
the next rung.
Yeah.
It was the same thing with the internet.
Yeah.
It was, everything's available, and it's like, wait, we need some safe. We need to make sure that we're not. If you allow sort of unrestrained growth of a new technology, it will always end up getting. This happened with the printing press too.
Yeah.
Immediately, one of the biggest complaints I remember I'll have to bring up is immediately as soon as the printing press came out, is all the industry of hand copying and selling, like, kind of, you might say, their own books for worth. Suddenly you could just steal someone's book and copy it and just sell it at one city over. And everyone's just like, they sell it for cheaper, all this stuff. So it's immediate. People undercutting each other and getting a leg up using the latest tool has always been who we are. I'm sure whoever invented the wheel did the same thing. He immediately, just use it to exploit a little bit. And we call that out, and it's immoral. But the problem right now is I feel like a lot of the journalists and newsmakers and stuff are either, just like in the year 2000 or around then, breathlessly creating another .com bubble.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to change everything. Like, we were told the internet was going to double in size, like, every other year to infinity, and then it didn't, and then everyone lost their shirts. It's going to be the same thing. Oh, everything's going to be an AI agent in 3 years, and let's just wait and see. Is kind of my response, because at the end of the day, we don't need to be breathlessly, like, thinking we're suddenly going to create the Terminator. But we're also not disposed to be fearful of it. And there were a lot of folks immediately that thought it was fearful, and they just go looking for hallucinations or liberalism and stuff. And computer scientists have been working on this. I mean, Elon and others are they're going to fix it and tweak it. I think you're right, though. The main way to use it is for brainstorming, the way my son used it, and to think creatively when you're kind of stuck. I helped a PhD student this morning. She had a very long chapter, about 35 pages, and she wanted to have 2 chapters. And she said, how can I use this where AI will efficiently help me? And I wrote her a prompt. And she was just like, oh, this is amazing. And all it did was give her a suggestion, but it sparked her brain. Yep. And the poor thing was sitting there for like 3 days trying to figure out what to do. And in 1 second, 1 click, she had it figured out. So it's going to make our lives a lot better, but we're going to see a lot of weird stuff too.
I think I was telling you before we started recording, for Christians, particularly those that don't have theology degrees, which is almost every Christian, that AI can be very useful for that if you prompt it the right way in terms of the source material. So I have it set in my, and I watch this, I put a bias in on purpose. I don't think it's a radically bad one, just to help weed out a lot of weird stuff. The bias I put in is whenever I ask you theological questions, I'm paraphrasing what I put in there, always reference conservative theologians, excluding radical leftist theologians of the 19th century, unless I'm asking you to show me what they said, and give some preference to Augustine and the early church fathers well. So in other words, what I'm trying to do is, because that's what I want to draw from. Now, you can bias it if you're not careful, and you need to get a full range of information. But I tell people, anyway, that's what I do. But back to what I suggest to folks, I tell people, and I tell my wife this, pull up Perplexity. And when you're looking through something and you're reading something, just do a prompt that says, what do theologians say about this passage? And it's amazing the historical and theological context you can get. Yeah. And that I think that's one way for Christian thinking to expand and even discipleship potentially to be enhanced a little bit. It's not, you don't want to be discipled by AI, but as a disciple of Christ, you need to really learn well what's behind this, because as you know so well, there are so many weird theological things people get just from reading off the top of Scripture without having some deeper context to it. And it's a great way to get that.
Or a thing I run into often is one person said something weird once, like 600 years ago, and therefore that's also an allowable interpretation within Christian faith, even though 99.9% of people never said that.
Right.
And you get confirmation bias where just because it's cited in the Wikipedia article under views of this debate doesn't mean. And so I actually do like that with AI is you're able to ask it word. My suggestion to folks if you just a regular old folk person and you just want to use AI the right way, ask AI. This is my always say, is Jared McGuire. Ask it to help you.
Yeah.
And one of the most effective things is you tell it the prompt you want.
Yeah.
And say, I want a prompt that does this, that avoid, like you just said, that avoids this and it looks for this. Write that prompt for me. It'll then give you the prompt. You then re-enter the prompt and get what you want instead of just tell me, the best theology ever. You're not going to get a very good answer for a generic prompt.
We haven't been able to get it throughout church history, much less from AI.
Well, the same thing happened though when Google came out. We remember we had to learn to write the way Google wants us to. Right. Which is instead of going best restaurant, you had to say best restaurant Florida. Nope, best restaurant Jacksonville, Florida.
Right.
And you learn to tell it what you want. We're in that growth phase right now where people still are learning how to communicate with AI.
But the nice thing about AI compared to to compare Google and AI is that what you have to do to create a good prompt is actually be good at the English language. If you really think
is why you need to ask it for it. Like if that's not your strong suit, say write a prompt that does it. And I told my son, use the audio feature and talk to it like you're telling a human what you need.
Yeah.
Because it'll actually understand you better than you think. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know our time's really limited. By the way, you were talking about the printing press earlier, and I just wanted to share this real quick because I'm kind of a geek, I guess. Wesley Huff yesterday posted a meme, and it says, what is your favorite medieval Latin script? What your favorite medieval Latin script says about you. And he had, rustic caps, unical, Merovingian, Carolingian, Gothic. Under each of them, it said, you're a nerd. And I said, a Carolingian, but I'm only saying that because that's my preference. I am a nerd. Yeah. There's so many fun things in the history of theology and the history of the church and just history in general. And you're an expert at that. And I know our time's short and I want to make sure we do it again. I mean, it's really fun. You and I will talk on the phone sometimes, just out of the blue, and we'll be on for 45 minutes. I was just calling to ask a question, and I appreciate that very much. And I hope I give you the same back. But
you do.
So what can people do to make sure they're following what you're doing? I know your YouTube channel is actually fairly huge, as I said at the beginning of the program, and you're putting new stuff on it again after a short hiatus. So tell people a little bit about where they can follow you, how they can consume what you're doing. And everyone wants to. You don't have to be a Cambridge PhD theologian like Ryan to enjoy what Ryan's doing. You bring it right down to earth. Tell people what they can do to find out more about you and stuff.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's funny. The YouTube thing was a happy accident. I don't think I've ever told this story before, but I didn't mean to start a YouTube career. This was like 12 years ago. So I look like a super early, like edgy adopter. What it was is a school had asked me to, not Gordon-Conwell where I was, but another school asked me to do a couple of videos for a course to kind of augment some lectures. I said, okay. And they said, do you want us to do it for you? And I said, no, I don't trust anyone to I was nerdy about how it looked. I wanted the pictures to look a certain way and stuff. So I remember I just started making videos out of nowhere and I put them on YouTube. And it has been a fun journey since because, it started as just my private page and now it's a professional page. But if you want to find, it's essentially all my graduate courses for free. I have courses on Lewis and Tolkien. That's my other nerdy side. And then basically all throughout church history. My big thing is I like to take a period of history and like, let's say you're talking about Calvin versus Arminius, like a big debate on free will or something. And you kind of hear that and you're like, what is that about? I liked my passion is explaining it to folks that know nothing and try to help them understand like what's going on. So yeah, YouTube is a big one. You just go in there and type Ryan Reeves YouTube. You tend to find it. Either that or you get a professional wrestler, and it's pretty easy to tell. But that is one. And then I've just come on with Man in the Mirror, which is a men's ministry out of Orlando, and I'm their senior editor for and digital lead, strategy lead, something like that. We're doing something called the New Adam Project, or it was my idea to call it that. This idea that like I get this sense that. This is true in my life. I can see this in some of my middle son, especially as he's sort of going through puberty and he's about to start high school now. And I'm just seeing him going like, Dad, the life just seems kind of crappy, right? Like He just feels frustrated, and I'm trying to raise boys that aren't the problem, and I'm finding interacting with him in ways that I never had to be interacted with. I'm having to teach him how to not be lonely, how to not have anxiety, how to not be chronically online. Like we didn't have to deal with this. I mean, my life was more skin, knees, and don't smoke pot, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so New Adam Project with Man in the Mirror is where I do a lot of writing, and I'm starting to do video creation with them as well, and a podcast over there. And it's just kind of, as I started to say, we do hot topics, but not hot takes. Like, we want to get into all this stuff that men are talking about. And there is a sense in which men are going, yeah, I feel more disrespected, more lost, less connected, and less clear about what it means to be a man than I did like 8-10 years ago, or even longer. And we're trying to attack that by saying, like, for example, men are complaining about not finding the right person to marry. And, our question was, are you marriageable?
Yeah.
And let's ask that question first.
Right.
And maybe the answer is yes. I'm not trying to be snarky, but maybe the answer is, well, you're emotionally immature, and let's talk about that, or something like that. So I do a lot of writing over there on more of a practical side, New Adam Project with Man in the Mirror. But that's my world now. Other than that, I'm raising kids. So,
yeah, which is a great thing. I always told people, my two boys, being a father is the biggest pain in the neck in the world, and I wouldn't trade a minute of it. It's kind of that way for sure. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I now have 2 teenagers and a guy going into 4th grade. My youngest is going into 5th grade, I should say. So he and I will hang out a lot, and the 2 older kids will make fun of me nonstop.
Yeah, that's right. It always happens that way. Well, Ryan Reeves, thanks. Oh, by the way, is there a website for Man in the Mirror Ministries?
It's just maninthemirror.org. Okay. And New Adam Project's integrated. You don't have to go to a different site. It's not the Michael Jackson song, but it sounds like it. It's an old book from the 80s that dealt with men's ministry. And we're about to celebrate our 40th year, actually. So my job is to come in and try to refresh it with what 21st century men are dealing with. So.
That's great. And by the way, Man in the Mirror, there is just a little bit of a passage in James about that. So obviously,
there is.
Well, Ryan, I appreciate it, growing friendship, and I'm just grateful you wanted to do this. I think by the way, I hope we can come back. There are probably a couple other tangents we need to flesh out sometime on a podcast, but this was really great. This is
a walk-in closet. I can come in here anytime.
That's awesome. Well, Ryan, stay with me briefly afterwards, but thanks for joining us on the Conservative Caucus podcast.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for joining us on the Conservative Caucus podcast today. Great discussion with Ryan Reeves. Share this with all of your friends who might be interested. Make sure that they know how to get a hold of this. And I think they're going to really find out there's a lot of great information here. I'm intent upon taking on this progressive so-called Christian idea that we need to do charity through government. It doesn't work. It never has worked, and it won't work. Every bit of good charity that really benefited the lives of others always happened in the private sector. We have an entire hospital system now. In fact, the whole concept of hospitals was largely created because of Christian charity on private means. And so we need to get back to that effort. So again, share, like the podcast, make sure that you make people aware of it. And also, we'd like to hear more information from you. If you have great ideas for people we ought to have on podcasts, make sure to email us at info@theconservativecaucus.com. That's info@theconservativecaucus.com. Let us know you heard the podcast and share with us some ideas that you have. We're always interested as we're building this program out to get the information that you're interested in. And again, go to our website at theconservativecaucus.com. Thanks for joining us on the Conservative Caucus podcast.